Platonic metaphysics. He held then that Aristotle's concepts here are true. But with what degree of logical certainty did he hold that? You see? And that isn't as clear. That isn't as clear. I'm inclined to think that the quest for absolutely indubitable certainty is more a product of 17th and 18th century epistemology than it is of a Greek thought carrying on, even though they have a very high degree of expectation beginning with Plato. And my reason for saying that is something that will be coming out in 2 or 3 weeks. There was a, well, let me anticipate it in this way. With the breakdown of the authority of the Church at the end of the Middle Ages, the authority of the Roman Church on matters where Scripture isn't explicit, there was left an epistemological vacuum. With the development of the Protestant Reformation, with the emphasis on the priesthood of believers and therefore the ability of the individual to read and interpret the Scripture for himself, there developed the fear of anarchy and sectarianism in religious matters. Now, into this epistemological vacuum, one leading voice was that of Greek and Roman skepticism. The writings of Sextus Empiricus, remember him, had been rediscovered. So that skepticism became again a viable force in the 16th century. And it was in response to that that the quest for certainty became one of the urgent priorities. That's what Descartes was about when he started I doubt therefore I existed. You see, he wants to find an argument out of skepticism. That's what a debate between Luther and Erasmus was about. Erasmus wanted to simply submit to the teachings of the Church on certain things. Not so Luther. Not so Luther, you see. So that the whole question of what you do in a vacuum of authority seemed to precipitate the Enlightenment quest for logical certainty. And in the end, what it turned out in the Enlightenment was that they turned to modern science as the authority, rather than anything else. Now, I think then that the concern about knowledge is not motivated in the same way in the Middle Ages, and so the level of expectation, the level of demand is not the same. Okay, let's go one step further then, from talking about the existence of God to the nature of God. And on the first topic that I've listed, we've already made a start. In the Aristotelian tradition, so it is with Aquinas, that our knowledge of the nature of natural objects is on the basis of experience by abstracting the essence, the nature, the form, from our experience of the whole range of members of any given class. Knowledge by abstraction. But when it comes to talking of God and our knowledge of God, there's a problem. Because there's no species of gods to gain experience with from which we can abstract the essence of God. So knowledge by abstraction from experience does not work in relationship to a knowledge of God. Do you follow anything? Kind of. You want me to run it again? All right, let me just rerun it in case you missed it, because it's important. In matters of science and our knowledge of nature, we can know the essence of things, the forms, the universal principles by abstracting them from our experience of species, genera, and so forth. That's fine when there are species and genera. But there aren't in the case of God. There's only one. You see. God is, as we say, sui generis. Meaning he is his own genus, of his own genus. The one and only member of the genus of gods is God. So then we don't have experience of a whole class of gods from which to abstract the nature of God. How then do we know anything about the nature of God? And basically the answer is not by abstraction, but by analogy. Not by abstraction, but by analogy. And that analogy depends, of course, on the whole hierarchy of beings, which is in step with the whole hierarchy of good, and the whole hierarchy of truth, intelligible form, you see. So he talks about two kinds of analogy, an analogy of degrees, where God is, of course, altogether good, infinite in perfection, that is to say, the greatest conceivable degree, analogy of degrees, and in addition, an analogy of proper proportionality, where proportionate to the degree of goodness is the degree of being, vice versa. So if God is necessary being at the top of that hierarchy, God is perfect goodness, God is perfect truth, you say everything in proportion. So that human beings are down here with a degree of goodness and a degree of intelligible order to their existence. And California mudslides are down here somewhere, you see, with a relatively low degree of good or intelligible order to California mudslides. So we know God, we can talk of God by way of analogy. Our language is analogical language. Now, in the piece you're reading on the principles of nature, you'll notice at the end he distinguishes three kinds of predication, which again is borrowed from Aristotle. There is univocal predication, where a word is used in one and the same sense. There is equivocal predication, where it's used in a wholly different sense. And there is analogical predication, where it's a similar sense. And so what Thomas does is to refine the notion of analogical predication. Now, that refining depends plainly on the concept of being. And being is not that easy. When one of Shakespeare's characters says to be or not to be, that is the question. From Aquinas' viewpoint, that's wrong. You see. Because being is a much more complex thing than just existing or not existing. Being has a certain nature of its own. That is to say, there are certain transcendental attributes of all being, or if you like, of all beings. Attributes which transcend the differences between species and genera and larger classes, and applies to every being. You see, every being. Now, to be or not to be, to exist or not to exist, is sort of a notion of stripped down existence, devoid of those transcendental attributes of being. The bareness of existence, a hollow echo of our own, to use Tennyson's line. You see. Oh, you get it in the concept of matter, and I think this came out in one of the discussions in the conference, I forget which one it was, where for Aquinas, matter is pure potentiality. But to say pure potentiality is to say, oh, it comes loaded, even bare matter, loaded with possibilities for good. You see? Whereas the concept of matter in 18th century mechanistic science is something devoid of all secondary qualities, colour, smell, feel, you see, dead, inert, impersonal, lifeless. So that Tennyson could never have written in Memoriam about that wasteland if he had been thinking of Aquinas' conception of being. Being for Aquinas is in the wasteland. You see. It was in mechanistic science, but not in Aristotelian science converted by Aquinas to Christianity. So then, whenever we think of being, the notion of being includes the notions of goodness and truth and beauty, transcendental attributes. You see. Now, insofar as these are transcendental attributes, we know them down here on the scale, and here on the scale, and here on the scale, and here on the scale in varying degrees. And by extrapolation, we readily speak of God by analogy of degrees. You see. Or with more logical precision, doing it with proportionality. You see. So we have a knowledge of God which is by analogy. Now, the two examples of that I want to pick up on have to do with truth and goodness. Truth and goodness. And I pick up on these two because those materials, at least some of them, are available to us in the anthology, and we can see it fairly well. On page 529, the mystifying question is posed whether truth resides only in the intellect. And from our standpoint, that is a mystifying thing, because nowadays, if we were to be discussing the question, what is truth, we would likely end up saying that truth is a property of propositions, that correspond to some extra-mental state of affairs. And inasmuch as propositions are thought, and propositions are true, then truth is in the intellect, in the thinking, in correct thinking. Thinking correct propositions would say truth is in the intellect. In other words, truth is an epistemological category. But as you read that article, Aquinas doesn't answer it that way. Truth doesn't reside only in the intellect. The other alternative is whether truth resides in the thing, in the being of a thing. And so we get a distinction, you notice, between truth that is epistemic and truth that is ontological. Ontological truth. The truth of a proposition or the truth of a being. What do you mean the truth of a being? Well, you can distinguish, I think, in English terminology between truth about philosophers and true philosophers. What is a true philosopher? One that's true to type. True to type? Well, it sounds like archetype. That's right. A true philosopher is one who's true to the essence of being a philosopher. You see? Yes, doesn't the creed say that Jesus Christ is true God and true man? What do you mean true man? True man? Is man just a proposition? No. True man is a man who conforms to the very essence of what it is to be human. He is truly human. True to type. You see? Ontological truth. So you have these two conceptions of truth, wherein one, the reference is simply to a proposition, propositional truth. You see, when we talk theologically about propositional revelation, we're talking about a revelation which can be expressed in terms of propositions. It can be thought, understood. Propositions that are either true or false, you see. Or, so either then truth of an epistemic sort, truth of propositions, or ontological truth, true beings, true to type. Yeah. And you see, that's the way it is with regard to this business of truth. True to type, what? Well, the archetypes in the mind of God. The archetypes which provide those patterns in accordance to which God creates. You see. That archetypal truth. And that is to say, God conceived as truth is the Logos. Yeah. The Logos. He's bringing Augustine's Logos concept into Aristotelian philosophy. This is God the Logos, in whom are hid all treasures of wisdom and knowledge. Remember that phrase from Colossians? You see. So that in that sense, all truth has its source in God, because all propositional truth is truth either about God or some aspect of God's creation. You see. So the reference point in talking of anything in nature is to the archetypes in God. When you say this is true, you're saying in effect God knows it's true. That's the point of reference. We're talking about truth. And God is true being, is the very epitome of being, with the transcendental attributes of being to perfection, that than which nothing greater can be conceived. So ontological truth. This is, so obviously in the tradition of Augustine and the Church Fathers, it means that the source of truth as we know it, whether ontological truth down here or whether propositional truth, the source of it all is God. God is the source of all truth. God is the standard for truth. In that sense, all truth is God's truth, no matter where it's found, if it's true. You see, propositional truth, ontological truth is always thanks to God, the Creator. Well, that's the theme then that runs through that first article. His definition of truth, propositional truth, is that truth is the equation of thought and thing. That's a kind of correspondence. Definition. Truth is the equation of thought and thing. When the proposition corresponds to the way the thing is, you've got a true proposition. Well, he asks, however, whether ontological truth or epistemological truth comes first. And his response is, truth is first in the intellect, and therefore in the being. That is to say, truth is first in the mind of God, in those archetypes. And thence in created beings, which are true this, true that, true the other. So, look over that article thoroughly. It's a rich one, and continues the tradition we found in Augustine. He goes on from that article, however, to the further fifth article, whether God is truth. Whether God is truth. And there he develops the logos side of things. Okay, let's move from there to the goodness of God. I want to come back to the will of God subsequently, but on the goodness of God, where we want, I think page 534, 535, in that general area. Any questions on truth? Comments there?
Yes, that essential and accidental, is the accidental truth the same as the epistemic?
Yeah, well, essence and accident are basically metaphysical things. That is to say, the essence is the essential nature of a thing. Accidents are things which aren't essential to its nature, but which happen to it.
I sort of got the impression that we can only know truth accidentally, and not...
Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. That is to say, knowing the truth about something is not of our essence. It's something that happens to us.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's right. We have a capacity for knowledge.
But only accidentally.
But actually achieving true knowledge depends on conditions which make knowledge possible. So in that sense, it's an accident that happens rather than a necessity which just emerges by nature. Right.
Just to make sure I understand, when he says that truth is first in the mind of God, he's saying ontological truth comes before.
No, he says that truth is first in the intellect. Now, I think in that context he's talking about truths about nature and even true types of things in nature. You see, because of God, truth for any created thing is first in the intellect of God. Okay, first in the intellect. Yeah. Now you might say, yes, but in God isn't God's true being, that he's true God prior to the truths in the mind of God? To which I think Aquinas would say, no. Nor is it the other way around. Because to be God is to be omniscient, all-knowing, you see. And if God were not all-knowing, truth in the intellect, he wouldn't be God. You see, because that is one of the transcendental attributes of... Okay. Yeah. Okay. Do you see the tradition continuing that we've been working with ever since the Greeks? The tradition grows, gets gradually Christianized in the early church, in St. Augustine, and onwards now, Aquinas. Watch this, because it's this Christian philosophical worldview that's going to disintegrate all of a sudden. When William of Ockham comes along, the thing seems to fall apart. We'll be getting to that on Monday, perhaps Wednesday of next week. Goodness, which is another of those transcendental attributes. The goodness of God is evident in his providence, that is to say, in the good things all the way down through his creation. And all being is good. That is to say that an apple has its own kind of good. A dog is good in the way that dogs are, in their very nature, good things. A human being is good in the sense that there is a kind of quality to human beings fitting into the overall interwoven goodness of the creation. Good there. Where there is evil, evil is a privation of that good, a deprivation, if you like. So that a bad apple is one that is no longer true to its essence. In fact, if it gets bad enough, it rots away into nothing, where there is no goodness.